The light switch made the exact same soft click it had made 20 years ago when I first stepped into that office. Back then, Sentry Software Group was just a dusty corner room with flickering bulbs, a folding chair, and a whiteboard. Now, it was a glass-walled corner office with an ergonomic setup, custom bookshelves, and a copper plaque that said LED Systems Architect for about 12 more seconds. I stood there, my hand resting on the toggle, watching the overhead lights blink off. Behind me, my office fern drooped, looking as if it had somehow heard the news before I did. The hallway outside buzzed with the dull, synchronized hum of people pretending to be busy. When you have been with a company as long as I have, your name becomes a whisper that middle managers squint at on organization squint at, and junior developers try to search on the directory. And yet, you can be erased with a single sentence. One smug, rehearsed, soul-sanitized human resources sentence. "The exit is behind you," Preston had said, grinning like a man who thought he had just won the lottery. "But we will get to Preston Cole in a moment. Before we do, let me explain how a man of 55 finds himself standing in the dark, holding a cardboard box of office supplies after dedicating 2 decades to a machine that did not have a heartbeat. It is a strange thing to leave a job you practically raised from infancy. When I joined the company, the entire code base was duct taped together by 2 guys working out of a damp apartment that smelled of stale pizza. The server was literally balanced on a stack of books under a kitchen table. I wrote the very first line of what would eventually become our $500 million software suite, the Titan Data Engine, on a borrowed laptop. I did not just build the system, I was the system. From the core database authentication protocols to the internal reporting logic, I had hand-coded every layer. I stayed behind, writing patches, fixing memory leaks, and keeping the platform alive. 3 chief executive officers came and went, and none of them ever questioned my place. When the application crashed at 2 in the morning, or the security certificates expired on New Year's Eve, they did not call marketing, they called the ghost in the machine, they called me. And then Preston Cole showed up. Preston was the kind of executive who used corporate buzzwords like chess pieces and wore cologne that smelled like burned ambition. The private equity firm had installed him to modernize us, which in reality meant slashing anything that did not look shiny and new on a slide deck. To him, I was legacy code in human form. He swaggered in with his laminated flowcharts and PowerPoint decks, talking about synergizing monetization and driving cloud-native revolutions. I asked him once what a microservices cluster actually did, just to see the look on his face. He smiled patronizingly and told me that he did not get into the weeds, which is executive speak for having absolutely no idea how the software worked. Still, I nodded, kept my mouth shut, and did my job. I kept the systems running, until this morning. Preston called me into his office at 9:42 in the morning. His assistant Chloe had sent a calendar invite titled Quick Touch Base. When I opened the door, Preston was sitting in his leather chair like a cat who had just figured out how to open the refrigerator. The human resources representatives, Brenda and Roger, flanked him like statues, their laptops open, their expressions pre-baked in professional concern. Preston stood up and extended his hand. I did not take it. "Edward," he said, using the tone of voice reserved for announcing bad weather, "we appreciate everything you have done. You have been with Sentry Software Group a long time." 20 years, I said flatly. I wanted the number to hang in the air like heavy smoke. It did. Preston cleared his throat, his smile faltering. "Yes, 20 incredible years. But we are entering a new phase. We are restructuring, and unfortunately that means phasing out legacy positions to make room for new talent. Fresh blood, Edward. I am sure you understand." I did not say a word. I just watched a droplet of rain slide down the glass window behind him. "We are offering you a generous severance package." Brenda piped up, her fingers tapping rapidly on her keyboard. 2 months of salary, healthcare transition services, and outplacement support. I looked at Preston, who had leaned forward, probably rehearsing his sincere face in the mirror that morning. "Do you have anything you would like to say, Edward?" Roger asked, his eyes darting to my hands. Looking for any sign of distress, they expected me to beg, to plead, to point out that the software they sold was entirely maintained by me. Instead, I stood up, picked up my notepad, and looked them in the eyes. "No," I said softly. "I have nothing to say. I walked out of the office, down the long corridor, and felt the eyes of the other developers burn into my back. None of them looked at me directly. I went back to my desk, packed my things, and turned off the light. One simple click, the end of an era, or so they thought. I walked down the 5 flights of stairs to avoid sharing the elevator. The cold October wind hit my face as I stepped outside. I put my box in the trunk, turned off my phone, and drove away. Preston thought he had executed a clean termination. He was about to find out that some engines cannot run without their architect. The phone was the first thing to go. I powered it off mid-vibration, mid-email, mid-whatever. The screen dimmed to black, like it had finally been relieved of duty, and I slid it into the glove compartment like a sleeping pill. I never intended to wake it up again. The company laptop joined it unopened in the passenger footwell. They would get it back when they earned it, or when someone from their legal department came crawling to retrieve it, whichever came first. The rain picked up, tapping on the windshield like the universe was slow clapping my departure. I did not drive home. Instead, I drove east, away from the office park, past the dead-eyed strip malls and forgotten diners toward a quiet spot I had not visited in years. It was a little cafe tucked behind a public library, the kind of place with chipped saucers, mismatched chairs, and wireless internet that might work if you begged it nicely. I parked, took a breath, walked inside, and let the warmth wash over me like a security blanket stitched from espresso and cinnamon rolls. Lily, the barista behind the counter, blinked when she saw me. "Edward," she said, her face lighting up. "I have not seen you in 10, maybe 15 years?" I smiled, feeling the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. "Do you still make those molasses cookies?" She grinned and pointed toward the glass display case. "Only for the loyalists." I ordered one, sat down in the far corner, where the wooden chair still wobbled if you shifted your weight wrong, and pulled out the red leather binder from my tote bag. The edges of the cover were worn, and the corners were bent like a book that had been reread through several past lives. I laid it on the table. No one around me knew that inside that binder lived the potential end of Century Software Group. I opened it to the first tab, labeled Initial Agreement. The document inside was dated July 12, 2006. It was signed with a pen that had since exploded in my desk drawer. Back in year 1, we were just 4 people sharing a borrowed conference room and one busted coffee maker. I wrote the code, every single line. The founders knew it too. I did not take a salary that first summer because they were burning through investor fumes just to keep the lights on. So instead, we agreed on paper, notarized and scanned twice, that the intellectual property would remain mine. Specifically, ownership of the source code, custom library files, and compiled binary executables would remain with the author Edward Vance under his personal development entity, Apex Forge LLC, until a formal, written intellectual property transfer agreement was signed by both parties. We called it a placeholder at the time. The founders said it would be updated when we went legitimate and secured real funding. Except we never did. Oh, sure. We incorporated Century Software Group, grew the business, built a massive client portfolio, and hired dozens of engineers. But the actual intellectual property assignment, the final handoff of that core code, was never completed. Too much momentum, too many shiny distractions. The board was always too busy chasing the next sales target or preparing for a merger. Preston's predecessors probably assumed it was done already. Preston himself would not have recognized a legal trap if it bit him on his social media profile. I flipped to the second tab, which contained an email chain from 2008. I had written to the founders, reminding them that we still needed to finalize the IP assignment and integrate Apex Forge into the Master Software Trust. Their reply was short and dismissive. "We will loop in legal when we have more bandwidth. For now, thank you for keeping us moving." Bandwidth. That was their favorite word for forgetting things on purpose. I kept everything. Every reminder, every avoidance, every shrugging response. The binder was not just proof. It was a timeline of corporate neglect. Every page reminded me of the late nights I had spent debugging database queries that no one else understood, of negotiating our first major client service level agreement while our chief financial officer panicked in the corner. It was a living record that said they may have built a massive skyscraper, but I still owned the ground beneath it. I sipped my coffee, the sweet molasses cookie melting against the heat. My fingers hovered over the keyboard of my personal laptop, the one I had purchased with my own money. No company could demand this machine back. I opened my personal email and drafted a message to Stuart Miller at Miller & Associates. The subject line was brief: IP licensing rights and assignment analysis. "Hi Stuart," I wrote. "I am ready to talk. I had an interesting morning. Let us set up a call for this afternoon." I attached scans of the original agreements from the red binder and clicked send. Then I closed my laptop and just breathed. There were no incoming Slack messages, no emergency server alerts, and no performance reviews written by people who could not spell database. Outside, the rain slowed to a gentle drizzle. Inside, I watched a man try to plug in his laptop charger upside down 3 times. The world kept turning. They thought they had deleted me with a 6-minute meeting and a smug smirk. But they did not know I kept receipts, and every clause in that red binder was a fuse waiting for the right match. I was finally ready to strike it. At 10:17 in the morning, the East Coast Healthcare portal timed out during login for 6 hospital administrators trying to pull critical compliance reports. 5 minutes later, the insurance claims processor flagged 4 internal errors. The core module was not responding. By 10:26, a government contractor from Washington left a voicemail for Sentry Software's Client Success Manager, demanding to know why they could not access the custom database dashboard. The client success team was in a state of absolute chaos, with phones ringing off the hook and email inboxes filling up with red flag messages from worried customers. The thing about enterprise software is that it does not implode with a loud bang. It cracks quietly and then all at once. By 10:34, someone in the information technology department, probably Owen, judging by the panicked string of diagnostics that hit the server logs, realized the authentication flow was not just stalling. It was locked. The back end was refusing credentials like a bouncer with a grudge. The system itself was saying it did not recognize the requests. The core database modules, the ones I had written during the first year and wrapped in a custom layer of encryption, were sealed off like a panic room. The licensing keys had expired, and the updated authentication handshake was gone. I was the only one who ever rotated those keys on a schedule no one else in the company had ever bothered to track. Human resources might have deactivated my corporate email, but they did not touch the substructure because they did not even know where it lived. At 11:02 in the morning, Preston Cole was in the server room, which was definitely not his natural habitat. Security footage later showed him storming in like a man possessed, shouting at the server racks as if they had personally insulted him. "Just reboot the system," he barked. "Do you want us to reboot the entire production environment?" Owen asked, blinking in terror. "Yes," Preston yelled. "Clear the memory cache and reset the containers." "We do not use containerization for the database kernel," Owen mumbled. "Delete whatever is blocking access," Preston shouted at the air. Owen turned pale as he watched the diagnostic outputs roll across the monitor. Timestamps were blinking, access loops were failing, and fallback credentials were spinning in circles. By 11:23, sales received the first angry call from a Fortune 100 client whose procurement team was unable to verify invoice packages. The portal glitched and reset to a 2017 user interface, looking like an archaeological dig site. Then came finance, then legal, and finally the development operations team started tracing the logs upstream. That was when the real panic began, because there was no upstream. The heartbeat server that all those requests passed through, the codebase that determined where and how data flowed, was gone from the active environment. It was not deleted, just unreachable, masked, and isolated. It had been wrapped in an invisibility cloak made of red tape and bad assumptions. Sentry Software's entire pipeline was grinding to a complete halt, and the sales team was forced to start making up excuses about scheduled database maintenance. By noon, 1/3 of our client stack could not access their dashboards. A fourth could not authenticate at all. The internal chat logs were melting. Who changed the core database routing? Why is the encryption key different? Who approved this update? Did Edward leave a credentials document before he left? No, just a binder. That last message came from Clara Finch in development operations. She had heard rumors about the red binder, but she had no idea what was actually inside it. Preston stormed back to his office, his nostrils flaring. Chloe tried to hand him a tablet with client escalations, but he brushed it aside. "I want eyes on everything," he ordered. "Find the last developer who touched those modules." "That would be Edward," Clara said cautiously, poking her head into his doorway. Silence descended on the room. Preston sat down slowly, staring at his laptop screen. The infrastructure map they were looking at had massive holes in it. Entire branches of the codebase were grayed out like ghost limbs. The internal administration panel said access revoked. But no one knew who had revoked it because, technically, it was never theirs to control in the first place. From my cafe seat, I refreshed Sentry Software's client status dashboard. I still had passive access, thanks to an oversight buried deep in the legacy build process. I saw over 2,000 failures, hundreds of escalations, and dozens of root access attempts, all failing. A notification chirped on my personal laptop. Stuart Miller, my lawyer, was confirming our call. His message was brief. "I have reviewed your documents. If what you sent is accurate, Sentry Software Group is about to have a very bad afternoon." I took another bite of my cookie. It was still warm. Back at Sentry Software headquarters, Preston ordered another system reset, and the database laughed in his face. Let him try to reboot it 1,000 times. The code did not answer to him. It answered to Apex Forge. At 12:46 in the afternoon, Sentry Software's general counsel tried to push an emergency database patch to bypass the failing authentication modules. It was one of those blunt force legal maneuvers where you throw a stack of paper at a wall and hope the system blinks. It did not blink. Instead, the console threw up a stark error message: unauthorized access attempt logged. Primary license holder not verified. Patch request denied under operating agreement. And then came the line that caused a full-body shiver through the entire IT department. Apex Forge LLC, registered owner Edward Vance. You see, back when we were broke, I had incorporated Apex Forge to house the intellectual property. It was standard practice for independent contractors at the time. The intent was always to transfer the ownership to Sentry Software Group once we had real funding. They had even thanked me for keeping it clean. That was how naive they were. No one ever circled back to close the loop because I was loyal, the kind of engineer they could underpay and rely on to always be there when something broke, until I was not. So when the general counsel tried to bypass my code, the system called out my name. That was when the emergency call chain lit up. First, legal called development operations. Then development operations called human resources. And human resources, with sweaty palms, finally called Preston Cole. "Sir, we have a major problem," Brenda said. Preston marched into the war room. "What do you mean Edward owns the database code?" he demanded. Clara Finch slid her laptop across the conference table. "It is not just the code," she said. "Technically, Apex Forge owns the licensing environment and the executable layer that governs all client access. It routes through Apex Forge, which we never officially acquired." Sentry Software's general counsel cleared his throat, shaking. There is also the matter of Clause 7.3 from the original agreement. The licensing rights remain with the author until transferred in writing. It has never been transferred. Preston stared at him. "Are you telling me he owns our software?" "I am telling you," the lawyer replied. "We never stopped him from owning it." The founder of Sentry Software Group, George Henderson, was currently at his vineyard in Sonoma when the news hit his inbox. He did not call the office. He roared across a speakerphone so loud it cracked the air in the conference room. "What do you mean Edward Vance owns the platform?" George barked. Preston tried to spin the situation. "It is just a temporary permissions error," he said. "We agreed to assign the intellectual property years ago." Well, George yelled, "Where is the signed agreement?" No one had an answer because the agreement did not exist. George lost his temper. "You let our lead architect walk out the door, and you did not check if the door locked behind him?" In the background, they could hear the sound of a wine glass shattering on concrete. George demanded they find me immediately, shouting that Sentry's entire valuation was at stake. But I was already in Stuart Miller's office, and we were on our second espresso. My phone, which had been turned off for hours, finally groaned to life at 3:02 in the afternoon. I turned it on for exactly one reason: to retrieve a two-factor authentication code so I could sign a digital document Stuart had prepared. The moment the screen lit up, the notifications exploded. I had 47 voicemails and 138 missed calls, totaling 185 calls. I did not listen to a single voicemail. The phone buzzed again immediately with a blocked number, then again and again. The screen was scrolling so fast with alerts that the battery started warming up. I simply muted the device and flipped it face down on the table. Stuart grinned, leaning back in his leather chair. "They are melting down like a Jenga tower," he said. "You were smart to keep every single email, Edward. Most people forget until it is too late." "I did not forget," I replied. "I knew the day they received private equity funding that they would stop treating developers like partners and start treating us like line items. I was just patient." On cue, my personal laptop chimed. It was a message from Nora West, a junior developer I had mentored. The message was short. "They are panicking in the war room. Are you okay?" I stared at the message, typed a single smiling face emoji in response, and logged off. Let them wonder what the emoji meant. Let Preston hold a meeting about it. Back at Sentry Software headquarters, Clara Finch had dug through the legacy email archives and found a message from 18 months ago. It was addressed to Preston Cole from Edward Vance. The subject was database licensing and audit recommendations. I had attached my recommendations and explicitly noted that Sentry Software Group had still not finalized the Apex Forge licensing transfer. Preston's reply was printed on the screen. "Thanks, Edward. Not a priority right now. Let us focus on modernization and forward velocity. I will circle back after the third quarter." They never circled back. Now, the general counsel was staring at that email as if it were a live grenade. George Henderson had already forwarded it to the board of directors with a single sentence. "This is why our company valuation is about to collapse." The mood in the office had shifted from panic to pointing fingers, and Preston was standing right in the center of the target. Every manager in the building was scrambling to distance themselves from Preston's fateful decision. The emergency board meeting was called for 5 in the afternoon, but by 4:36 in the afternoon, most of the key members were already seated. The lights in Sentry Software's conference room were too bright and the air was freezing. Everyone looked exhausted from 12 hours of spinning their wheels in the mud of their own making. They were waiting for one person, George Henderson. He had landed in his private jet only 30 minutes prior and had power walked through the lobby. When George entered the boardroom, no one dared speak. Preston Cole stood up, attempting to offer a polite handshake to ease the tension. George walked right past him without a word and slammed a thick leather folder onto the table. Inside were the printed emails, the original agreements, and a red sticky note with a single handwritten word, "Why?" The general counsel cleared his throat, holding a copy of our original contract. He read Clause 7.3 aloud. "Licensing rights remain with the author until transferred or renegotiated in writing." He explained that under federal copyright law, specifically Title 17, United States Code, Section 204, a transfer of copyright ownership is not valid unless it is in writing and signed by the owner. Under Section 106, the creator retains the exclusive rights. Because Sentry Software Group had never executed the transfer, we technically did not own the core database engine. We had only an implied non-exclusive license, which was fully revocable. George stared at Preston, his hands balling into fists. "You fired the architect of our core product without verifying that we actually owned what he built," George said, his voice trembling with rage. "He was legacy." Preston stammered, sweating through his collar. "We needed new leadership." "No," George replied. "You needed to do your job, and instead you detonated our entire foundation." George looked at the board members. "We have already voted," he announced. "Sentry Software Group accepts the licensing terms." Then he turned to Preston, "And you are done. Immediately upon execution of this contract, you will pack your things and leave this building." The board members nodded in unison, none of them willing to defend Preston's disastrous leadership. The terms Stuart Miller and I had drafted were absolute. Sentry Software Group would sign a 3-year exclusive licensing agreement. They would pay $90 million up front, plus a 10% royalty on every new database installation using the Apex Forge stack. I would also retain full advisory oversight with board-level veto power on any architectural changes. Under Clause 14, the company would issue a formal public retraction of my termination, stating it was the result of an internal misunderstanding. And under Clause 15, Preston Cole was to be removed from all operational authority immediately. I sat in Stewart's 23rd floor office, watching the city traffic crawl below. Stewart pushed the thick document package toward me. "They signed, Edward," he said with a broad grin. "They did not even try to negotiate the royalties or the veto power. They knew they had zero leverage and were staring at a federal audit if they refused." I picked up my pen and signed the top page. The ink dried quickly, marking a final seal on the battle. Sentry Software had no choice but to pay. They could not rebuild 20 years of core infrastructure in 48 hours, and they knew it. When I walked back into Sentry Software's headquarters the next morning, my security badge was active. I walked down the same hallway, past the droopy fern in the corner, and pushed open my old office door. The developers in the hallway watched me pass, some of them nodding in quiet respect, others looking away in embarrassment. I saw Owen in the IT pit, and he gave me a subtle thumbs up. Clara Finch was smiling at her desk. Nora West ran up to me, whispering that it was the greatest victory the engineering department had ever seen. I thanked them and stepped into my space. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The chair, the bookshelves, the faded coffee mug. The only difference was the silence. It was a respectful, quiet silence, as if the building itself recognized who had returned. I walked to the wall and rested my hand on the switch. Same light, same click. The fluorescent bulbs hummed to life overhead like an old friend. I did not smile and I did not cry. I just stood there, absorbing the truth. They had tried to erase me, to treat my life's work as a disposable asset. But real power is not a corner office or a fancy title. Real power is holding the blueprints and making them pay rent on the foundation they thought they owned. Appreciate you sticking around, you wise old rebels. Smash that subscribe button or this old systems architect might just have to pull another plug.